In one of the most controversial legal decisions of Mueller time, Trump's former campaign chair, Paul Manafort, was sentenced to just 47 months behind bars. It's the longest sentence to come out of the investigation so far, but for many in Washington, it's nowhere near long enough.
This sentence, in my view, failed to do justice to the very serious crimes that Manafort has committed, as well as his utter disrespect for the law.
People commit white-collar crimes. They should be prepared to bring their toothbrush and spend as much time behind bars as anybody else.
The 47-month sentence came only after Virginia federal court judge T.S. Ellis chose to ignore sentencing guidelines for Manafort's tax fraud, bank fraud, and foreign lobbying convictions, which could have given him between 19 and 25 years in prison. Manafort faces another sentencing for conspiracy in Washington this Wednesday. The Virginia case has more than just politicians speaking out. Here's former acting director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe.
I think it's an incredibly lenient sentence in light not just of the offenses he was convicted for, but the additional offenses that he has pled guilty to. Like most people, I was shocked by how lenient the sentence was.
In an op-ed in the Washington Post, former federal judge Nancy Gertner said she was taken aback by Manafort's sentence. Judge Gertner, now a lecturer at Harvard Law School, joins me. Good to see you, Judge. Along with Bruce Singal, a defense attorney who worked along with Mueller in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. Good to see you, Bruce. You open your op-ed in the Washington Post by saying, I'm loath to criticize any judge for being too lenient, and then you criticize him for being too lenient. Give us the gist of what your argument is, Judge.
Well, I actually prefaced it with a disclaimer that everybody is too harsh, that the sentencing guidelines are ridiculous and disproportionate. But in that world, it's hard. How do you affect equity? In other words, you don't begin to be, quote, more lenient with respect to someone like Manafort. That's not where you begin. You begin with the guy who's addicted, or you begin with the guy, who had an abusive childhood. You don't begin with Manafort, because nothing about the Manafort case screams leniency.
Including, you mentioned most of these things. He lied.
Right.
He was not a cooperative witness, unlike Michael Cohen, theoretically.
Right.
Michael Cohen. He never apologizes in his statement to the court.
Aren't
all those the things that judges like you in your former life look for?
Well, not only judges, but this judge. What I was trying to do is I actually did some research. This judge, who cares about remorse, who cares about whether someone had an explanation for what they did, and who hammers, I'm told, poor and minority defendants in his courtroom. So what was going on here is the question you should next ask?
Well, I'm going to ask.
Okay. What I think is going on here is I think that this was a message that Judge Ellis was sending, which is this special prosecution is no big deal. He's trivializing it. He analogized it to ordinary tax evasion. Manafort's case was not ordinary tax evasion.
Do you buy her argument here, Bruce?
Well, I buy it in part, and certainly I agree, though, that the emphasis in the sentencing guidelines on loss allows for highly inflated sentencing guidelines, and so it's understandable that the judge fell well below those guidelines. But having said that, it was an excessively lenient sentence, but I think we have to not lose track of the fact that our bar has become so low that we are now saying the President of the United States, whose campaign manager was convicted of multiple felonies and sentenced to 4 years, that is now being trumpeted as vindication by the President and his followers.
Right.
But I'm going to stay with Manafort for a few minutes and expand on what you said a minute ago. You wrote a piece about this judge exhibiting bias in August of last year. One of the things you didn't show, which you touched on here in either piece, I thought, is the bias to me was not just against the prosecuting attorneys. The bias that was evident to me, which caused this sentence not to be a surprise to me, was against the whole Mueller investigation.
Oh, totally.
Here's what he says in last year. You don't really, this is to the prosecutors, you don't really care about Mr. Manafort. You really care about what information Mr. Manafort can give you to lead to Mr. Trump. How is that not a basis for recusal in a case like this?
Well, at this point, recusal is a very high bar, and I don't think that the Mueller team wanted to mess with that, particularly knowing that Manafort's lawyer could have had both cases consolidated in Washington, D.C., but chose not to. So now that they know that there's another round in Washington, they don't have to challenge this judge.
What was your reaction to what he originally said about Mueller? It's clear to me, maybe I'm off base, that's what this sentence was about. It wasn't about all these other factors.
I think he clearly had a disdain for this case and for the Mueller prosecutions generally, and he was sending a message. I don't think it was a basis to accuse himself, because it's not uncommon for judges to express such disdain for a case.
I want to talk about the next judge, Judge Amy Berman Jackson, federal court judge. 2 conspiracy counts, each carry 5 years with them. They could be concurrent, which for people at home mean not an add-on. Right. They don't have to be 10 years. They could be on top of the 10 years. You know, the thing that judges are not supposed to do is do makeup calls. But when I was thinking about you coming here today, because a lot of people are saying, well, don't worry, this judge, I think her name was Hamlin, in the Father Gagan case in the early 2000s, one of the Catholic, he patted a kid on the butt in a pool, and he got 10 years in jail. Everybody except the judge acknowledged he was not being sentenced for patting the kid on the butt. He was sentenced for all the sexual abuse he perpetrated against kids for which he wasn't prosecuted. Right. So do you really believe that Jackson, when she sentences this guy, is not going to be thinking about the lenient sentence that Ellis gave him?
I think that she might be thinking about it, but, you know, judging is a struggle. I hate to sort of pull this on you, but it's a struggle. I mean, and so the last thing she wants to do is play into the caricature of she's the Democrat appointee, he's the Republican appointee. I think that what she'll do is dig down into the case in front of her, and the case in front of her, the facts in front of her, offer plenty of justification for a harsher sentence.
What does a harsh sentence mean?
I don't know. I mean,
8 years on top of the 4?
It could be, or even 5 years on top of the 4.
Is that what you expect?
I do. Let's not forget, this is the judge in the D.C. case who already has found Manafort to have lied to the prosecutors.
And flouted the gag order and a whole host of things.
And tampered with witnesses.
That's right.
That's one of the issues.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a pretty fundamental problem.
It is a major problem, and she is very much aware of it and very much involved in it, and I think that will be reflected in a harsher sentence on her part.
You know, I am not generally a cup half full kind of guy. I'm a cup fully empty kind of person. But does something good come out of this? The one thing that's happened for non-lawyers in this country, I think, is we've seen read a lot about inequity in sentences. I know it's something that concerns you a lot. The one story that everybody's talking about is this New York, I think he's a public defender, whose client was sentenced to 36 to 72 months for stealing $100 worth of quarters from a laundry room in his residence. And that's not aberrational. Does this have any positive effect, or is it just a passing kind of thing?
There are numbers of effects, and it's not clear the direction it will go in. So there are those stories about how the numbers of people who are hammered in his courtroom and courtrooms across the country who are poor and minority defendants. There are also some people who look at this and say judges shouldn't have discretion. Let's go back to mandatory minimums and mandatory guidelines. So it's not clear which direction this is going to bounce.
I want to go back to what you said. This is the President of the United States on Friday about what he read into the Manafort judgment by Ellis. Here it is.
I feel very badly for Paul Manafort. I think it's been a very, very tough time for him. But if you notice, both his lawyer, a highly respected man, and a very highly respected judge, the judge said there was no collusion with Russia. It's had nothing to do with collusion.
As you both shake your heads like this during the... So, continue in your thought. He never said anything like that, right?
He clearly misstated what the judge said is the case before me does not involve collusion with Russia. He didn't say there is no collusion with Russia.
Right. No, I mean, they got to Manafort's bank fraud and offshore accounts by following the money. And they came up with a different crime, and they were perfectly justified to prosecute it.
But why does the judge even say that? To me, that is even more evidence of his anti-Mueller bias. It has nothing to do with the case. So it is going to opine about what it isn't about. The case is what it is about, not what it isn't.
But that's what I'm saying. I mean, that's what I think. You know, sentencing often sends a message: deterrence. Don't do this again. Anyone in this situation. The message he was sending was a pro-Trump message. Trump got that message. That's what was going on, and that is troubling.
Bruce.
One other thing, though, let's not forget. Nobody's talking about it, but the government can appeal that sentence. And I've had 2 cases, including one currently, where in particular the government asked for 35 years and got only 9, and they appealed that, which they have the right to do. So
how often is the government successful in those kind of cases?
Not often, because it's a difficult burden.
Can I change gears and ask you something else, if I may? Michael Cohen, with his testimony on February 27th, everybody watched. This was part of his opening statement, not a off-the-cuff response to a question. This is part of his opening statement. Here it is.
I have never asked for, nor would I accept, a pardon from President Trump.
And here's Lanny Davis, one of Cohen's lawyers, in a statement from March 7th. Michael was open to the ongoing dangling of a possible pardon by Trump representatives privately in the media. During that time period, he directed his attorney to explore possibilities of a pardon at one point with Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. To me, that's pretty close to perjury before Congress. Is it not?
Yes. Do you want another explanation? No. Yes. I think that's extraordinary. He is volunteering to say something which is not true.
So even though I know you're not a huge Trump fan, the guy is convicted of lying. He lied under oath after he said he's cleansed his soul in front of Congress. Why should we believe anything he says, other than that which is corroborated by documentation?
That's what I was about to say. That's the only thing one can believe, is that which is corroborated. And the most important thing he said was, look at these checks. They were reimbursement for the Stormy Daniels payments. Look at when they're going on. There are things that can be corroborated.
Where are you on the Cohen?
Well, I have a little different perspective
Please.
on it. Trump said, I had a personal conversation with Cohen where he asked me for a pardon and I said no. And everybody's saying, well, if Trump is being truthful, then that really harms Cohen. In fact, if Trump is being truthful, it's very incriminating of Trump, because he should not be having such a conversation as the President of the United States with a defendant in a criminal case.
But regardless, whether Trump, that happened, whether based on Lanny Davis's comment alone, it appears that Cohen lied to Congress. Yes.
Well, I think it depends how finely you parse it, and if
Cohen's statement, you parse it.
Well, and I will parse it finely by saying that if Cohen says I did not ask for pardon, and he asked for his lawyer early on to ask for pardon, then that might be a fine parsing.
Guilty. Nice to see you, Bruce. Judge, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.